Hi, everybody. This is Jimmy, and you're reading with Jimmy, and we're analyzing what we read. Hopefully, you read with Jimmy, The 548 by John Cheever. So, this is a summary, background, and interpretation. And I want to go back to Aristotle again and talk about tragedy or comedy because this is an interesting short story. And we'll go over some definitions. But before that, let's summarize. If you've been tuning into my analysis in the past, sometimes discussing what happened takes a long time. But in this case, Ms. Dent stalks Blake, her employer, who fired her after seducing her, and makes him put his face in the mud. That's basically what happens in this exciting short story. It's a pretty simple plot, but the story is not so simple as we have to understand the motivations of the characters. So I want to start by understanding the difference, according to Aristotle, between a comedy and a tragedy. Aristotle said tragedies dealt with serious matters and comedies deal with trivial matters. Tragedies aim at rousing and then purging pity and fear, the emotions, and as we will see, and have seen if you've been reading with Jimmy for a while, that's exactly what they do. I think we're safe in concluding that the 548 is a tragedy. It's not really dealing with trivial subjects. Having a gun pointed at someone is not trivial. In any case, we're going to go and define comedy a little bit, but we're not using the word tragedy as an event causing great suffering, destruction, or distress, like a serious accident, crime, or natural catastrophe. When a hurricane hits, a tornado hits, people use tragedy like that, but that's not how we're using the word, as an event causing great suffering. Or are we? The reason I ask if we are or not is because Blake certainly suffered throughout this whole story, from the moment he saw her when he got off the elevator to the moment she made him put his face in the dirt. But people throw words around like tragedy, comedy, whatever. They throw words around a lot these days, but I think we're safe in arguing the 548 has as its root such an event that causes great suffering. Great suffering could be a relative term. Great is an adjective modifying suffering, but certainly Blake suffers. Certainly Miss Dent suffered. Miss Dent is definitely under the category of having suffered. So let's review what Aristotle says about tragedy to make sure we're right. According to Aristotle, tragedy has 6 elements, which we'll look at: plot, character, diction, thought, spectacle, and song, of which the first 2 are primary. If you've been reading with me for a while, we talk about plot and character and diction a lot, and then we stop there and we don't worry about these other 3 elements. But plot, character, and diction are important. He defines tragedy in his book called The Poetics as an imitation of an action that's serious, complete, a certain magnitude, in language embellished with each kind of artistic ornament, the several kinds being found in separate parts of the play, in the form of action, not narrative, action. There's a lot of action in this story, would you agree, even though it's being narrated by a third-person narrator? And then through pity and fear affecting the proper purgation of these emotions. In other words, the release of pity and fear. And if you read the 548 with me, hopefully, if you're a sensitive person, you felt pity, and you certainly, through Blake, experienced fear. Fear is an important word in this story and in life. In any case, a tragedy is first a representation of human action. It has serious, often dire consequences. The characters are representative of elevated social status. That changed over the years, but in this case, these are, this is just regular people, right? These are not kings and queens and princes like in Hamlet. The plot is complete, coherent, and whole. It lasts a long time to adequately reverse the hero's fortune. It certainly did that, and it lasts a train ride. This is a train ride. A little before and a little bit after a train ride, one train ride, from the city to the suburbs. The language is composed of employs troops of figurative metaphorical use and other heightened, unusual uses of speech and a mixture of different poetic meters. That's not true here, but it does include different allusions. One is to the book of Job, as we'll see. The mode of imitation is drama as opposed to narrative. So we could say that this is really not, doesn't meet Aristotle's definition, Jimmy, because it's a narrative. Well, it is, but if you notice in the narrative, there's a lot of dialogue. There's a lot of dialogue. So it is, in fact, a drama. And it arouses pity and fear and brings about catharsis, right? We want to remember the word catharsis. So this has changed. For example, the characters are not elevated. We touched that. It has allusions, etc. Third-person narrator, meaning the teller of the story, is outside the story. You understand the difference by now? Hopefully. If not, here's a quick review. None of the characters in the 548 are narrating the story. There's someone outside that story. He's called the omniscient narrator, the godlike narrator, this guy right here. He's outside the story. If Blake was narrating the story, we would look at the first line as I saw her as soon as I got out of the elevator, but there is no I. There's I in dialogue, but not as the narrator of the story. So he's outside the story. And we have to believe that story because of the outside narrator. If we don't believe what the narrator is saying, none of the story would make sense. So he automatically becomes truthful. Unlike in life, if you have a character inside the story, he could be lying. But in this case, being outside the story, he's not a liar. And as the story is narrated, there's also techniques used. In this case, they use a flashback technique. We'll talk about that. Okay, that's where he goes back as he's narrating what happens when he gets out of the elevator. There's a flashback to what happened on what caused him to be concerned about Miss Dent following him. There's about 1,460 words in the story, which means we can classify it as a short story. These are arbitrary classifications. What does that mean? Some guy in some room, some woman in some room, someone who cares, says that a short story should be 1,500 to 7,500 words. That's a guideline. I wouldn't swear by it. If you took me to court to swear on that, I would have to say, I don't know, Your Honor. In stories, whether long or short, especially every word counts. This is very important, whether you're writing a short story, a novel, a drama. Every word in classical literature counts. Now, Jimmy, why do you call 548 classical literature? It's an American short story. The guy, he's a recent writer, but he's dead. Secondly, the reason it's classic because Jimmy said so. Basically, it's a classic because it's an excellent example of not only a short story, but a short story thought out with characters and motivations that really paved the way for other short stories as you start to understand short stories. Now, you could say after this discussion, Jimmy, I reject your interpretation. This is not a classic. This is not classical literature. You are welcome to your opinion. In fact, I applaud your opinion. But it's going to stay on my website as a classic piece of literature because it's a good story. You're going to see other stories that you may say they're not classics. You may read Hamlet and say, Jimmy, that's not a classic, and I didn't understand it. You're welcome to your opinion. It's a classic. So, why do I say every word counts? This is the first sentence of the story. When Blake stepped out of the elevator, he saw her. Well, why? Every word counts. Take a word out of that sentence. When Blake out of the elevator, what? Out of the elevator. You got every word. When he stepped out of the elevator, he saw her. You can use pronouns, he, and not know it's Blake, but it's a he, but then you got a double he, and the second pronoun refers to he. It's Blake. No. I know this is what century this is and what year this is. Just remember about pronouns. There are pronouns. You cannot pick your own pronoun. This is a short story. We're in the world of the story. We have to follow what the third person narrator is writing about. And he's telling us that Blake is a he. Got it? A few people, mostly men waiting for girls. Mostly men waiting for girls. Well, Jimmy, that's a bigot. Girls. Well, it's chauvinistic. Stop the madness. Don't judge the story by your own moral compass. This story was written, as you'll find out, in the 50s. If you research the 50s, it's a different world. Just like when you read Hamlet. If you read Hamlet, it was written 400 years ago. And if you research what was going on in 400 years ago, you're going to understand the story a hell of a lot better than if you start imposing your point of view on this story. By the way, that's one of the reasons it's a classic, because it was written in the 50s. You know how long ago that was? In any case, Jimmy does, because Jimmy was just a little kid in the 50s. Jimmy, you're an old guy. You bet I am. And I'm still around, kicking. So here we are, mostly men waiting for girls. There was nothing wrong in the 50s in saying that. Well, even if you think it's wrong now, put that out of your mind, go into the story. This is the third person narrator telling us this, and you must believe him for the story to work. If you're going to, unless you don't want to appreciate the story, so you can stop now and just go on to the next one, or just don't bookmark my website. But if you're going to understand anything that's covered on this website, you have to go into the story. Forget everything you know. Just go into the story. So a few people, mostly men waiting for girls, stood in the lobby watching the elevator doors. Why are they watching the elevator doors? Because they're waiting for the girls to come out, right? She was among them. So she's among them. She's one of the, besides the men waiting out there, she was among the men waiting for him to come out of the doors. Got it? Every word counts. Remember, I've been telling you every time you read with Jimmy, the first paragraph, the first sentence, the first page of anything you read is the most important part of the story, because it sets the tone, whether it's first or third person. So consider the beginning of the story. There's 10 words in this first sentence. And we meet immediately the two main characters, Blake and her. We don't know who her is. We find out who her is later on when he's on the train, because he can't remember her name, but he does remember it finally when he's on the train. But we find out that this is, in fact, Miss Dent. This is, right, the protagonist. He's the protagonist, the antagonist. I don't want to get into too many definitions. In any case, in that first sentence, you see how concise the writing is, which is why it's a classic. He's not wasting any time. We immediately find out there's two characters involved. We don't know what the 548 means. We can speculate, but we don't know what that means yet. So the next couple of sentences positions Dent among mostly men waiting for girls. Then the narrator continued. As he saw her face took on a look of such loathing and purpose that he, Blake, realized she, Dent, we don't know that yet, had been waiting for him. She had been waiting for him. This is a realization on the part of the Blake, right? He realized she's waiting for you. Loathing and purpose. Have you looked up loathing? I loathe you. And have you looked up purpose? Do you have a purpose in life? If her face took on a look of loathing and purpose, what do you think that means when he saw her? She loathes him. Look up. Loathe. I loathe you. Hate him. Hate. Hate is a strong word, but this is loathing. I despise you. And purpose. Purpose means that there's something, she's here for a reason. So the narrator, third person narrator, is building tension. There's tension in these words, right? He did not approach her. He did not approach her. Now, He knows her. He recognizes her. She sees him, and her face becomes full of loathing and purpose, but he did not approach her. She had no legitimate business with him. He had nothing to say. Okay, so he doesn't want to talk to her. I don't want to talk to you. So if she had no legitimate business, maybe her business is illegitimate, right? The word legitimate, remember, I'm telling you that when the narrator is narrating and the words are being chosen by the writer, don't talk about the writer, they're being chosen with a purpose. There's no word wasted. He could have chose any word. He could have omitted the word legitimate. What do you mean, Jimmy? I thought the third-person narrator is narrating, and he's godlike. Of course he is, but he's being guided by the writer, of course, but we don't talk about the writer. But the narrator could have said she had no business with him. He didn't. The narrator didn't say that. The third-person narrator is helping us understand the story. The beauty of a third-person narrator is that he's our friend. He's telling us the truth with purpose and reason and helping us. If the third-person narrator had said she had no business with him, that's a big difference when you add the word legitimate business with him. Because the minute you adjective a word, the minute you put an adjective in front of a word, you change the word completely. Or did you not study grammar? We can go into a grammar lesson right now if you want to. I don't want to delay it. But legitimate modifies business, which means it's not just business, it's legitimate business, which means Blake is saying she, the woman, had no legitimate business with him. So why is she waiting for him with loathing and purpose? You understand? Well, Jimmy, I didn't get that the first time you read this. Well, of course you didn't, because you don't know what loathing and purpose is, nor have you ever really had fear, perhaps, or maybe not really, you know what I'm saying? They had nothing to say. Well, obviously she has something to say. She's there. So this creates tension. It also forms a pattern of pursuit of Blake by Dent. And note the narrator. Blake did not approach her, legitimate. This is what we just talked about. Got it? So read it again slowly and then put yourself in Blake's shoes. Or put yourself in Dent's shoes. Why should you put yourself in these people's shoes? Well, if you've been reading with Jimmy, we read classics in order to see how other people lead their lives and how to lead our own. Well, Jimmy, I'm not ever going to do what Dent did. Jimmy, I'm not going to do what Blake did. If I was Blake and I saw her and I did what Blake did to her, I'd go up there and I'd slap her in the. Don't talk like that. You understand? Put yourself in the character's shoes. Go with the story. Before I go on, I want to touch on comedy. Aristotle says comedy represents human beings worse than they are. So they're, well, Jimmy, I think this is a comedy. Well, is this worse than people are? But he notes common characters are not evil, just ridiculous and laughable. There's nothing to laugh at in the story, is there? If you're laughing at something in the story, maybe something here or there, we can talk about that. A giggle here, a giggle there. But there's nothing ridiculous in here. This woman had a gun, and she's stalking Blake. She gets on the train with him, right? She rides with him. She pokes the gun in his belly, and she says, I don't want to kill you, but I will. And she just wants to talk to him. If you think that's laughable and ridiculous, well, Jimmy, times have changed. Nobody does that anymore. Really? Really? Are you kidding me? Nobody does this anymore? You haven't read a story like this anymore? Just turn on the damn news. So I think we can conclude this is a tragedy, and we're going to prove it to you. So the plot. Aristotle says the plot is simple or complex. It must be unified, beginning, middle, end. A simple plot as opposed to a complex plot. Doesn't include a reversal. It just presents stuff. A complex plot includes a reversal of dramatic situation and recognition. Complex plots unfold through internal logic and causality, and they are not simply strings of episodes. Ba-boom, 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 ba-boom. If you watch any kind of series on Netflix or television and you're dissatisfied with them, chances are they are not complex plots. What does that mean? Well, it means nobody undergoes a change. So catharsis is purging. Catharsis, fear and pity. Oh my God, I'm so glad it didn't turn out like that. So debate continues what he actually meant by the word catharsis. But the concept is linked to positive social function of tragedy. Tragedy has a positive social. It teaches us how other people lead their lives and how we should lead ours. You understand? The structure. Aristotle says it should be well structured, beginning, middle, end. This is clearly, 548 meets this criteria. There's a beginning, there's a middle, and there's an end. And the 548 does this. Two main characters appear in the beginning. They develop conflict and tension, with Dent boarding the train with Blake, and then the end, which resolves the tension. There's a unity of action. Aristotle argues that the successful plot should have a single unified theme or conflict that drives the narrative forward. All events should contribute to the central theme. What is the theme of the story? The 548 meets this criteria, with the conflict being Dent and Blake, which we find out is about a flashback, and the rest of the story we learn about Blake's character and Dent's character. Google says theme means, quote, the message woven throughout the story. The message woven throughout the story. Often about important topics like human nature and society. It's deeper. The theme. What is the theme? So what is the theme of the 548? What do you think? Email me, jimmy@readingwithjimmy.com. And you got to prove it to me. You got to prove it with examples. Some people will say that they don't fire, that some people will say that the theme of 548 is don't fire anybody. Sorry. Which reminds Jimmy of a story when he was a creative director. He had hired a guy for production artist, and we also used to hire 90-day trial. That was always part of the contract. And in those days, everybody understood that. And so I told my art director, guy I just admired greatly, passed on already, but he was just a tremendous, tremendous guy. Let's call him Clark. I said, Clark, you got to tell me within 90 days if this guy's going to, support us. We had about, 4 art directors, a couple of production artists, and this guy was the third one we hired. He's a big agency. And so he comes in on day, 89 or 88. Because I would ask him every week, Clark, how's he doing? Oh, okay. Clark was a gentleman, rode motorcycles, fought in World War II, really just a warrior, but he was just a gentleman, beautiful artist. I mean, the guy was uncanny. Day 88, he's not going to work out. I said, well, now you tell me. So I knew there was something wrong with this guy from the moment I hired him, because the next day after I hired him, he had taken the paper that we used to cover our boards with. In those days, you made mechanical boards, they called them. And he covered his whole office with this black crepe paper, turned his office from what it was painted, probably white, office white, to black. And I said, but I don't judge. I let circumstances judge. This is a little sidebar I'm doing with you. Anyway, I go to his office. I said, well, it's not going to work out. And he goes, what do you mean? Call him in my office. What do you mean it's not going to work out? I said, 90 days, it's just not working out. I got to let you go. You can't do that. I just bought a house, he says. I said, well, I'm sorry about that, but I can't do it. You're not supporting you're not supportive, blah, 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 blah. And he storms out of my office. totally ticked off. And you never know, right? A few minutes later, he comes back, slams the door, and starts swearing at me. Oh, you son of I'm gonna throw your ass through the window. Now, we're 21 floors up in downtown Chicago. And those windows, you can't break these windows unless you got something really, because they're sealed shut. They don't want these windows open at any time when you're 21 floors up. And I basically at those moments, you say to yourself, well, I got a choice. I could, you flee or you confront. In any kind of situation like that, there's flight or fight or flight, right? You've heard that? Fight or flight. So since I knew the windows won't break, I fought. I said, if you're going to throw me in, I'm taking you with me. We're swearing at each other. And then, well, yeah. So he goes out, slams the door again. And then he comes back again after about 5 minutes. The secretary said, should I call security? I said, no, that's all right. He's just blowing off steam. But he comes back again. And he starts yelling again. And I'm thinking, this is crazy. Something's going to happen. 1 week ago in the building I worked in, somebody shot a guy on the escalator. You can read about it in those days. They basically, it was a lover's quarrel and he was shot on the escalator. And, he was shot and he was on the escalator, his head going boom, 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 boom. I didn't see it, but I read about it and we heard about it because we worked in the building. They said, lock down. There's a guy with a gun. Even in those days, they would warn you. So I said, no, he leaves again for the second time. Then he comes back the third time. And this time I thought he had the gun because of what I heard the week before, but he didn't. He had calmed down, closed the door, and he apologized. And I said, will you accept my apology? I said, of course. He says, will you write me a recommendation? I said, of course I will. And he left and we saw him no more. It's a sad story. After he left, the phone rings and my boss called me up and goes, Jim? I said, Frank? He says, you all right? I said, yes, Frank, thanks a lot. I said, everything's okay. Thank you very much. Anyway, some people will walk away from the 548 and say, don't fire anyone. They change laws on firing. Or some will say, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Let's face it, Blake was a weird, he was a jerk, right? He treated her badly. So do unto others. But still others will say something else. There are many themes in this story. Ladies and gentlemen, in any story you read, in any book you read, in any novel or drama you watch or see, there's many themes, especially in classical literature. And that's one of the reasons this is a classic, because there's multiple themes. So what you walk away with as a theme or multiple themes, because people are complex. These people are not simple to understand, right? You got a woman who's been in the hospital with mental problems, perhaps not, who knows? And you got a guy who's just insensitive. He's just insensitive. So we read classics to find out how others lead their lives, etc. Plot always involves character. Aristotle, well-developed characters who undergo change. The 548 meets this criteria through the third-person narrator, and we learn especially what kind of person Blake is through his dialogue and his reactions to Dent, as well as learning about Dent in her dialogue. So whether or not you think these people changed, you have to interpret it and prove it from what the third-person narrator says. I have my own opinions, which we'll talk about. So you can define characters by traits, character traits. Some traits are irresponsible, jealous, judgmental. There's all sorts of traits. Google traits. Well, how many character traits do you think there are? Pardon me. Well, character of a person is always revealed always in a story like this, whether it's first or third person narration, through their actions. People, and ladies and gentlemen, people, real people, not just characters in stories, reveal themselves in those ways through their actions and through their dialogue. That's how people tell you about themselves. And sometimes they don't even know they're speaking through their actions, but they're telling you about themselves. That's why you have to be an observer. You have to really look, and through their actions. We recently were at an event, and they do a lottery drawing and then they split the prizes. They give to charity half of it, and then the winner gets the other half of the prize. And I never win anything, but I won this time. And so when I got up there to come up here to collect your money, it was a couple, $100. And I said, nope, I don't want it. Give it to the charity, because this is a great organization. They do great things for this charity. It's for, actually, they hire these service dogs. They help the servicemen with service dogs. So I said, nope, give it to the charity. And it was like, no one had ever done that. And I've been to several events like that, and they always just take the money and run. But I told my wife, I said, I'm gonna just give it back. I mean, it's not like you're gonna win the lottery with zillions and zillions, right? I got a thank you card the other day from one of the board members. That's, these are little gestures. That doesn't mean I'm a charitable guy, but it says something about you. And it basically, now that you think about it, and these other people thought about it, maybe at the next event, I started a trend. Maybe nobody will walk away with $100 and give it back, because it is a good event. Anyway, how could the character do that? All the character says, Blake did this, Blake did that. Well, here's an example. It had been 9 years since Blake had built a bookshelf in the doorway that connected their rooms and had fitted into the bookshelf wooden doors that could be locked, since he did not want the children to see his books. What does that tell you? What does that tell you about Blake? He built bookshelves in the doorway that connected their rooms. Whose rooms? His wife's in his room, right? And he had fitted into the bookshelf wooden doors that could be locked. He didn't want children seeing the books. What kind of books does Blake read? Boy, would I like to know, but the third-person narrator didn't tell me that. But man, would that be interesting? Huh? I never locked my books up. You can read any book that I got on my shelf. I'm not ashamed. Of course, they're all classics. Nobody reads them. The narrator never tells us. But the narrator then says later, Blake had gone home one night, overworked and tired. You read this, right? He finds out that his supper isn't ready. He goes to the calendar and he draws a circle around the date. The 12th, 2 weeks is the 19th. And he says, I'm not going to speak to you for 2 weeks. What kind of guy does that? Who does that? Who does that? Who does that? He was home one night, overworked and tired, and found Louise had done nothing about getting supper. There's his wife's name, right? Mrs. Blake. Louise Blake. The gin bottle was half empty, so she's got a drinking problem. If you were married to this schmuck, wouldn't you have a drinking problem? I'm just saying. So what kind of guy does this? This is all revealing his character. All of it. So what traits did you find for Blake and for Dent, and what proof do you have? Email me. Causality. Plot should be causally connected. It means cause, right? Everything has a cause. And logical. And this meets the criteria because each event from the time he spots her to the time she walks away across to the other side of the station, it follows in a logical way. And then there's a reversal and recognition. Fortunes are reversed. They change unexpectedly. They changed for Blake the minute he got out of the elevator and saw her. It wasn't the normal day, the normal train ride, the normal double Gibsons or whatever. So it meets this criteria as they experience a reversal. She reverses too after she gets fired by her. And as far as recognition, we have to define who's the protagonist, the hero. This could be her, could be him. These are relative words. You don't have to take a person's word for it or anyway. You can do the deciding. Did Blake experience the moment of insight that leads to a deeper understanding of himself? I think she did. When she came out of hospital the first time, she was still unsure. She was unsteady, and then he fires her. That sparked her change. And if you consider the ending, this is the last sentence, after he had his face put in the mud and the dirt and the slime, he got up to his feet and picked up his hat from the ground where it had fallen and walked home. That's all the narrator tells us. What do you think? What do you think? And then there's language. So these are, this is a wonderful story about characters, reversals, danger, fear, and language. Language is very important to Aristotle's definition of tragedy, and language is important here. Even though it was written in 1954, there's a lot of language in here, a lot of references in here that may, if you didn't live in the 50s, 60s, 70s, it may be as foreign to you as Hamlet 400 years ago is to many people. So it's important to, when you read it, to be careful, understand definitions. And that's why I tell you all the time, throw away your own experiences. Well, Jimmy, you just related some things that because you were born here, but I was only a little tyke in the 50s. But having grown up in the 50s, and you don't need to grow up in the 50s to understand the 50s. Just watch some old movies. That's all you got to do. All right. Some of the language I want to talk to you about. By the way, when you read on your own, when you buy books, and hopefully you're buying some books on your own because of what you're doing with me here, I want you to start reading with a highlighter or a pen. This is how I read this story. And if you read some of my other stories with me, I go through this in a very meticulous way. And I've marked it up. You should start reading with, well, Jimmy, then I can't give the book away or sell it because I marked it up. Well, if you buy classics, you should never, ever give them away, especially if you mark them up. I can show you some of my books that I've marked up that I've had for over 30 years. And I still refer to them. This book here, I've had this book since I was a teacher in the 70s. This story, I used to teach this to underachievers, right? So it's all marked up. That's why when I read to you, I had to buy a new edition to scan in here so you don't see my markups. And then I went back and I marked it up according to what I thought you would appreciate today, not 30, 40 years ago. Juxtaposition is important. It's where you take juxtaposition, two things being seen or placed together in contrast, right? This is when he's looking in the window that's arranged like a room with people, right? This is like looking into a house, his house, the Watkins house, his neighbor's house, whatever. There are cups, magazines to read, flowers, right? But the flowers were dead and the cups were empty and the guests had not come. Can you imagine this? This should be a happy scene, but the flowers are dead. Do you think it's an accident that the third-person narrator is telling us this? Or is it a reflection, in fact, of Blake and his home? His son starts living, with the neighbors, right? You remember the story? And he's spending a lot of time there. He's moved there, basically. To the guy who is breaking the sumptuary laws. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Would you let your son move next door? And if your son did move next door, what's going on next door that's not going on in your house? Pardon me, I took a sip of water. All right. The narrator tells us what Blake is thinking, and I want you to know why. She might be meaning to do him harm. He's starting to realize that Miss Dent, and remember, he can't remember her name yet, may want to hurt him, Rancid is smelling, tasting unpleasant. Morbid is characterized by unusual, disturbing, unpleasant. Him a morbid consciousness of his own physicalness. and of the ease with which he could be hurt. We go through life and we often think just how dangerous sometimes it could be. You never know. One of the things that they teach you in law enforcement is to be an awareness. You have to have situational awareness. In other words, you don't go anywhere without noting what is the situation here? Who's sitting over there? What are they doing? You're looking around. You're not just looking at your iPhone. You're looking around. Because, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't matter what you believe, and I don't care if you believe what I'm about to say, but it's a dangerous world. I don't want you to be paranoid. Let's enjoy the flowers, okay? But if you're looking at a flower, even a bee can come by and think you're a flower and sting you. Kidding. Have you ever been stung by a bee? I've been bitten so much sometimes. So, anyway. He saw her waiting for him by a hut. So she's stalking this guy, right? Let's look at some other language. So he talks about how he's thinking about how he can escape her. And he's thinking the city he knew well and where the maze of street level and underground passages, elevator banks, and crowded lobbies would make it easy for a man to lose a pursuer. If you've never lived in a big city, you don't know what he's talking about. You don't. If you've lived in a big city, like I did, you know exactly what he's talking about. Because you can walk into Chicago, and on a rainy day, you never have to walk outside because these buildings are connected underneath the sidewalk. It's got a whole structure, and the wise people who've been there and working downtown a long time know how to do this. He did it, but he didn't do it. Because it was absurd to imagine being harmed on a crowded street. He thought, that's crazy, right? That's crazy. I'm just saying, the more you know, the more you can appreciate. Well, Jimmy, aren't you violating what you just told us? Aren't you bringing in your own experience into the story? No. I'm saying this is what the third person narrator told me, and I can understand that and appreciate it better than anybody who's never lived in a big city and doesn't understand what he's talking about. So if you never lived in a big city, the first question in your mind is this true? So find out. Talk to somebody from a big city. I can tell you, I can get from one end of downtown Chicago to the train station with walking outside only twice. Seriously. Can you imagine that in wintertime? It was a blessing. Skullduggeries. There's a great word. You don't hear that these days. Skullduggery. Underhanded, unscrupulous behavior. Trickery. Do you know anybody who, he calls them international skullduggeries. Look at the news today. There's plenty of skullduggeries going on. This is the flashback. It starts here. See this right here? This is the flashback area. This tells the story currently, and then there's a flashback. Flashback is a wonderful technique. It's used in series sometimes you're watching and your series and it starts out and then suddenly you see 2 years earlier. That's a flashback. And why do they flash back? To help you understand what's going on now. If this flashback, imagine this, read the story again and take the flashback out. You lose a lot. You lose a whole layer of meaning that helps you understand their motivation, right? Deprivation is damaging material benefits to be basic necessity of style. Gibson is a mixed drink. Did you ever have a Gibson? I'm not encouraging you to drink. But it's basically gin, vermouth, and an onion. Cute. This is interesting, too. He said she put a rose on his desk, and once she put a rose on his desk, and he dropped it into the wastebasket. I don't like roses, he told her. What the hell kind of guy is this? If someone put a rose on your desk, how many ways do you think you have to tell them you don't like it? Or do you tell them you don't like it? And you just say, oh, thank you. and then throw it out after they leave the office if you don't like them. Or he could have said, I'm allergic to roses. Or he didn't have to say a damn thing, but he does. Who does that? And look how revealing this one thing he did. Look how revealing that is. Can you imagine that? Describes a room, the flashback. This is a definition of a flashback that I gave. It's an interjected scene that takes the narrative back in time. Diffidence, modesty or shyness resulting from a lack of self-confidence. That's Miss Dent, isn't it? Diffidence. So this is the end of the flashback. So it went from the prior page all the way here. And she suffers from a lack of self-esteem. Do you know what self-esteem is? Do you have self-esteem? Self-esteem is confidence in your own worth. So she doesn't have that. Blake has that. He's pretty confident, or is he? Is he? Is he really? Does he? We're going to talk about that before we finish it. Okay. Express versus a local train schedule. If you've never ridden the trains to the city, you know they have different schedules. Express trains go right? And local trains, which is the 548, they make every stop. So if you're living outside the city 20 miles, 30 miles, and you don't get the express, it takes you a lot longer to get home, right? So he missed his train. Why? Because he was drinking his Gibsons. He missed it, so he went in for a drink, paused, got on that train, but it gives him a longer time with Miss Dent. Then the narrator describes Blake for us, the sumptuary laws. Sumptuary are relating rules that control spending, especially for moral reasons, sumptuary. And what are the sumptuary laws here? Oh my God, his neighbor wears a corduroy jacket. Oh my God, a corduroy jacket. That's breaking a sumptuary law. Because everybody else has the tan raincoat, the suit, the tie, lack of color, right? The sumptuary laws. Keep that in mind. And he paints a picture of Blake's personal life, what his actions tell us. Irreducible, unable to be destroyed or moved. So you see how the narrator indirectly tells us Blake is married with children. So he's basically, again, giving a little background, giving us more background on Blake and what it means and what he did to Miss Dent. Sumptuary laws seem to mean something to Blake, don't they? Sumptuary laws. But here's where the story talks about how his kid, Charlie, 14 years old, was moving more and more into the Watkins, who wore corduroy shirt. Oh my gosh. So sumptuary laws are laws that he thinks are, basic laws. And yet he cheats on his wife. It says specifically in this case, Ms. Dent is the type of girl he would choose to do this with, to carry on with. And you know what he does, right? He carries on with her and then he fires her. That's all he could do. And she tries to see him, but he denies seeing her, so she's got to find him. Don't do that, she whispers. Don't do that, all right? Don't move or I'll kill you. So she's whispering in his ear. If he wanted to stand and shout, he could not. His tongue had swelled to twice its size. Have you ever felt fear? Fear is one of the things about our great warriors is they overcome fear. Can you imagine a warrior, a Navy SEAL, having his tongue swell to twice his size and shout for help, but he couldn't talk, and his legs were limp when they're going into battle? So how do you overcome your fear? How do you overcome any fear? Well, you have to face it, and you have to practice. And Blake is totally out of practice, even though he fought in the war. He's never really felt, who knows what he did in the war, but he has fear. He's afraid. And when you're afraid, you don't think straight. You can't, it's horrible. If you're afraid and you make a decision, it's probably the wrong decision. So it's important to understand that and put yourself in that position. And then she quotes in here when she's talking to him, Where shall wisdom be found? It says, what says? The Bible. Where is the place of understanding? You can look that up in the King James Bible. You should always have some type of Bible by your side to look up these illusions, because this is from the Bible. Remember, illusions are very important. They deepen your understanding. She's quoting from here. She's quoting verbatim from the Bible. I can only quote a couple of things, and this is not one of them. This is from the book of Job. Do you know the book of Job? Have you ever read the book of Job? The book of Job is about God and the devil making a deal about Job. The devil says, I can get this guy to stop honoring you and worshiping you, and I could break him. And God says, you can't break Job. I know Job, you can't break him. He says, let's make a bet. So they bet, more or less. And for the whole book of Job, the devil is raining down. He gets boils. He gets his family, his farm burned. All sorts of stuff happens to Job, but he always honors God. He always honors God. He doesn't break him, because Job was a good man. That's the first word in the story. And remember what I told you about stories? The first sentence, the first word is very important. In the book of Job, the first sentence, I'm quoting, I hope I'm right. Job was a good man. Now, if you don't believe that, all the rest of this story doesn't make any sense why the devil would try to. Anyway, so she's quoting from here, and even if I have to kill you, they wouldn't be able to do anything to me except put me back in the hospital. She's been in the hospital. What kind of hospital? Well, probably the mental hospital, right? She's a nervous wreck. We're closing in on the end. Now, note the repetition of not going out and working. She doesn't go out. She doesn't go out. I have terrible. She hands him a letter to read. She puts it on the chair, right, on the coach where she's riding the train. Dear husband, she'd written. Remember, Blake didn't like her handwriting. He hated it. Why? Well, it wasn't perfect like him. Kidding. I'm not. Dear husband, I have terrible desires. I have a gift for dreams, right? I've never had a true friend in my whole life. Can you imagine that? Can you possibly fathom what that means? Never to have had a true friend. Now, she's using the word friend, modifying it with the adjective true, because we all have friends. I got a lot of friends, Jimmy. Do you? Do you have a true friend? What is a true friend? Can you define that? Can you imagine never, ever having a true friend? And note that he was in the war. Okay. The upper edge side of the boat, blah, blah, blah. After all, I know more about love than you. Now she's starting to find her rhythm. She's got this guy, right? He's off the train. Stop. I feel sorry for you. I'm like, I'm afraid the sky will fall down on me. She's revealing herself to Blake. She's just, then she says, I'm still better than you. She is, isn't she? Heaven, heaven and the brotherhood of man. I dream about picnics, castles, and after all, I know more about love than you. I know more about love. That's what this story is about, isn't it? One of the themes, if you haven't guessed already, is about love. What is love? Is it circling a calendar and telling your wife you're not going to talk to her for 2 weeks? What is love? Is it the shallowness of a Blake or the depth of a mental patient like Miss Dent? I mean, she is a little off, right? But is she? Or is she just looking for what? Love. Love. They never wanted to cure me. See this here? Right? She says that a couple of times. The hospitals never wanted. They wanted to take away her self-esteem, which may or may not be true. Kneel down, right? Pay attention, take notice of, right? Heed me. Heed. Who uses the word heed? Heed me. I'm better than you. and I shouldn't waste my time and spoil my life. Put your face in the dirt. And she screamed, put your face in the dirt. 3 times she tells him that. Do what I say. So he does. And he's crying now. He's weeping. And then she says, I'm better. And she walks away. And that's the ending of the story. And he puts his hat on and he walks home. It's over. Done. Right? Ladies and gentlemen, that's catharsis for her. She's got, fear. She's afraid, pity, right? That's catharsis. She's relieved. Now, did he change? Is he going to go back and kiss his wife and say, I'm sorry, dear, for not talking to you for 2 weeks? Is he going to change? Is he going to change? We can speculate all we want, but that's not in the story. Notice it stops. He walked home from the ground. He got up, picked his hat up and walked home. Didn't run home because he feels she's on the other side of the platform now. And he could tell by looking at her, it's over. She just wanted to put his face in the dirt. In the dirt. What do you think? In Dostoevsky's Brothers Karamazov, there's a character called Father Zosima. We're going to read that one day. Boy, is it long. I don't know if you'll be with me for that. Dostoevsky used to write lots of very thick books, beautiful books. And Father Zosima, who's a monk, and one of the brothers Karamazov, Alyosha, is a monk. In any case, he says, all we can do is kiss the ground and beg forgiveness. If you're going to think about living, dying, life, what is life? Why should you be here? Are you good, bad, indifferent, whatever? All we can do is kiss the ground and beg forgiveness. I'm not saying that John Cheever, the third-person narrator, read Dostoevsky. I'm not saying that. I'm saying that the well-read person who has read classical literature sees and appreciates more in this little story than the person who doesn't. Because that's exactly what she tried to do to Blake. And which is probably why I don't think he understood what she was trying to do. He kissed the ground and begged forgiveness. Now I feel better, she says, and she walks away. Not that she said, put your face in the dirt. She didn't say, ask my forgiveness, you jerk. I want to say a bad word. I'm not going to say it. She just puts his face in the dirt. She makes him do it. If you were Blake, would you do it? I don't know. You've been reading with Jimmy. This is the interpretation of John Cheever's 548. I went a little long. Hope you're still with me. I really appreciate you being with me. I hope you stayed with me. And if not, c'est la vie. Hope to see you at the next reading. Thanks so much for being here. Have a great day. And remember, situational awareness, very important.